and you'll see where I'm heading with this, who here actually works in HR in a business? Oh, fascinating. That was not what I was expecting. Who works in business but not in HR? Who's a student? Okay. Anyone work in public policy or with government? Yeah, awesome. Anybody who is self-employed? Okay. Who would like to be self-employed? Okay, there we go. Okay, just to I want to sort of get a mix of who's in the room, and part of this is because I think I'm a bit of an odd duck, so to speak, in this setting because I work at the intersection of private sector, public sector, social sector. So by way of introduction, I am an independent advisor. I work with startups, with companies, with governments, policymakers, occasionally with investors and universities and think tanks, all around not just the future of work, but this sort of new economy. Where are we heading with how people are earning income, how people are meeting their needs, how we're rethinking and recreating how we work, how we live, how the pieces fit together. And I do this, I think one of the things I am known for is my global perspective. So I'm deeply interested in the whole global digital nomad end of things. I work in about 15 or 20 different countries every year. I've been to more than 100 countries. I've worked in more than 50. And I share that simply because that's a bit odd. People are like, where is home? And home is here. I walked here tonight. So that said, I don't do a lot of work here, but one of the things I've discovered is that everywhere wants to know what everyone else is doing, and there's no easy way to find that out. And I strongly believe that here in Portland, we can learn from so many places that are in a way off our radar. And so I thought I would share some anecdotes and stories and that sort of thing, but really thinking about this less from the perspective of what is the HR function in my organization, and more, what would it look like for Portland to be the best city on the planet for the future of work? And that means understanding how people will be working. Are we W-2? Are we 1099? Are we remote? Are we flexible? All of this, because as I know many of you know, the rules and regulations and the ecosystem as a whole is woefully outdated for where humans are heading. So that was my first slide. Just pause, sort of set the stage here. This thing, this smartphone, it's not even 12 years old. It turns 12 in July. That is wild when you think about how much our lives have transformed. And this is not just in terms of how you apply for a job, how you work, what apps you use, but how you find work, right? Also, I love just kind of setting the stage, because when you think about it, you're like, wow, this isn't just a phone, right? So this is a phone, and the internet, and a television, and a camera, and a video recorder, and a world atlas, and a bank, and a ride, and the list goes on. Like, this is wild. I know a lot of people, they don't even use this phone to make calls, right? So when you think about it in this weird way, a smartphone is a great example of we've hacked everything through our phone. So when we think about what it means to hack HR, I want us to think about what this means from an ecosystem perspective. I'm totally on board with what Katie said about burning it down. Sometimes that is exactly what's needed. But also, if we're trying to hack something where we stand, sometimes we gotta go this way to get the quickest path is not necessarily a straight line. There's a lot of hacking. I would love to hack parts of public policy right now that put constraints or artificial limitations on certain aspects of HR. So it's not just the HR department, it's this bigger ecosystem that we're all looking at. So I spend, as I mentioned, a lot of time globally, a lot of time looking at how people are working in different ways. And I think of HR departments very much more on the traditional employment end of things, you could say. I spend a lot of time looking at shifts in how people are working, the independent, flexible, and remote workforce. And this is one of those things I find that most people simply aren't aware of how fast it's changing. And so with apologies for those of you who are familiar, just a few stats. Already today, 57 million Americans, that is 35% of the total workforce, and 47% of millennials are freelance. That number is expected to exceed 50%, so majority of the entire workforce by 2027. That means if you have a kid who's in a high school freshman today, he or she is more likely to be freelance than get a job upon college graduation. Fascinating. Freelancers are growing 3 times as fast as the rest of the workforce, et cetera, et cetera. Then on the remote end of things, and I should also say, just as context, just curious, I was gonna ask this earlier, when I say the term freelance, who here thinks like scrappy, barely getting by, Band-Aid for a troubled economy? Okay, good. And who thinks like newfound freedom, possibility for prosperity? Okay, there's usually a mix. I always like to just get the read. When I say freelance, all I mean is somebody without one single professional affiliation, not an employee. So this includes independent consultants and skilled professionals, as well as Lyft drivers, Airbnb hosts, and a whole bunch of folks that are using a lot of the on-demand apps. So it's very broad, but this is not a scrappy thing, and this is not an elite thing. This is kind of across all spectrums. So across all sectors and the entire work spectrum. So white collar, blue collar, pink collar, green collar. This is just this, it's like this train that has left the station. So in any case, as I think about where I have worked and spent time and so forth, fascinating what some places are doing. So as we think about if within less than a decade, most workers will be freelance in the US, and globally, I mean, stats are all over the map. Some countries it's already 80% freelance. Other countries, primarily in Europe, with much stronger labor unions and safety nets, tends to be about 5 percentage points lower, but it depends by country. Anyway, not that far away, not halfway around the world. Has anyone heard about what Vermont is doing? Oh, no. Okay. Last year, Vermont launched an economic development strategy specifically around remote workers. Vermont will pay you $10,000 to move there and work remotely. Whoa, okay, this is interesting. They will help you get set up, they'll help you with paying taxes, they're establishing a statewide network of co-working spaces. This is super interesting, because think about something like remote work. It's a two-way street. On the one hand, you, if you're a company, HR, you can access talent in other places that works remotely. And you, as a talented professional, as a worker, you can be here in Portland and you can access opportunities in different places. So Vermont is kind of flipping the lens on this, and they're saying, great, it's not just, if you think about historically, cities and economic development strategies have been about job creation, get companies to plant a headquarters here, build a building, hire people, boom, done. No. They're like, we want to earn revenue in this city, but it can be digital, it can be virtual, it can be remote, it can be 1099, it can be W-2, like this gets interesting. So interesting, this is just an anecdote. It just launched this year, so it's too early to say whether it's been a resounding success, but they've been inundated by interest. They had more interest in the first month after announcing launch than they expected to have in more than a year. Since that time, the state of Oklahoma has done something very similar, and there are at least half a dozen other states that are considering it. So this is the kind of thing I think, okay, like nobody has the answers in this space. This is super interesting. Why isn't Portland doing more? Why isn't Oregon doing more? And I've had multiple conversations here. The focus is still on jobs creation. No problem with that, but we need to be thinking, sort of breaking the box, breaking some molds a little bit more. Countries like Malaysia, Estonia, I don't know, these are not places that are typically on your radar. They are light years ahead of where the typical US city is with regards to breaking down barriers to enable workers to earn income in new ways and connect to opportunities to earn income globally. So what I wanted to do, and maybe this is a good tee up for a Q&A, I want to brainstorm. What ought Portland to do? And I'm not talking just government. I'm talking what can your business do as part of the Portland workforce ecosystem? What can schools and universities do? What can tech companies do? What can insurance providers, healthcare providers? There's so many different actors in this petri dish, so to speak. But what are the things, what would be on your wish list to make Portland the best city for the future workforce, which looks quite different than it did 20 years ago or 50 years ago, and even in many respects as it does today. So with that, thank you, and yeah.